Welcome to episode 14 of The Pod Couple.
Is it 14?
It is 14.
Oh, wow. I thought it was 15.
Oh.
I'm out there in the future.
You're looking ahead. You got to keep your eye on the ball here. Yeah, well, you know what? We have a little programming note here for you folks. After last week, The Pod Couple took a long, hard look at ourselves in the mirror, and we came to the conclusion that we are more
handsome.
Handsomely handsome, but at the same time
bloated,
morbidly obese, perhaps, was a phrase that came to mind. So, yeah, and so we said, you know what, something's got to be done about this. It's time to have a new look. It's time to get slim and trim.
Tuck that tummy.
That's right. I'm gonna get a lap band, whatever it takes. And so we're gonna cut the fat. Not that there was any fat in the Pod Couple. I know that every minute was enjoyable for our audience.
Stuff.
But nevertheless, you have to make hard choices. And so we have decided to, at least for the moment, unless there's an outpouring of fan mail.
It's such a ridiculous concept, your body can't handle it.
Yeah, that was not intentional cough at all. That was just an involuntary reaction to the absurdity of that statement. But anyway, we've decided that we're going to cut the director series from the Pod Couple.
For now.
We may spin it off into its own podcast in the future. But we'll see. And again, if you object strenuously to this as a listener, you certainly can let us know on Twitter at the Pod Couple or via email, podcouplepodcast@gmail.com. But yeah, so that's going to go away. Let's keep this a little tighter. I'm going to try to cut down also, pare down a little bit with our quick hits and our music and book recommendations. So keep those a little tighter and just, overall bring this thing in. We're still going to concentrate on TV and politics, of course. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, and that's not in response to any sort of outside influence. It's more a decision that we made because we are not as young and spry as we used to be, and we can't just stay out all hours of the night and not expect repercussions.
Yeah, 14 weeks ago, we could just record this thing willy-nilly, no problem. We're up until 2 a.m., that's no problem, but
it takes a toll.
Right. Yeah, we've aged a lot in these 14 weeks and getting worn down. So anyway, in the spirit of keeping things tight and being much more svelte, we are going to jump right into TV here. And we're going to talk about Game of Thrones once again. This is our 5th straight week of Game of Thrones, but it is one of those shows, perhaps the only show on television right now that really almost demands a weekly discussion. And certainly can support it. So, episode 5 was called The Door, and it was another very strong entry in the Game of Thrones series.
Yeah, seeing the world post-book, sort of. I think by now, 5 episodes in, everyone's fears have been assuaged.
I would say so. The early stumbles seem to definitely be righted. That you see where they're, I think it was a little awkward maybe getting where they needed to go. And there's still a few lingering possible issues with, I think, pacing and things like that you could nitpick. But for the most part, they're turning out strong stuff here. And it definitely feels like you're in good hands.
It feels like they kind of went our podcast direction, or maybe subconsciously we've influenced, we've been influenced by their decision because they seem like they're trimming the fat on these stories. This whole season seems very much about less about setup and more about just getting to action after action. There's no time now where people are traveling anymore. Yeah. They're just there. They say I'm going to go there, and then nothing happens on the journey, and they're just there. Suddenly Littlefinger, for example, is just at the wall.
Right. Yeah, and maybe some of transitioning to that is what was part of those early stumbles, was them kind of trying to figure out how to do that and how to get the pieces in place to reach the pitch of narrative momentum that they needed to have in order to really tell this story and to finish this story ultimately, because that's what it comes down to is, Martin can theoretically keep writing books, right? I mean, he says it's going to be a 7-book series, but if he wants to turn into 8 or 9 or 10, I mean, this has happened before with other fantasy authors, and there's nothing stopping him from making that decision. But with the television schedules, while HBO would probably allow it to continue going, I mean, these guys, this is a grueling thing making this show, and I don't think they want to be doing it for 10 years of their lives. So I think they want to wrap this thing up, and it's important that they do it and do the story justice and have all these varying storylines come together and reach satisfying conclusions. So
yeah, and monetarily it just makes sense because you want everything to wrap up so you can move on to those sweet DVD sales,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll get my DVD player out of mothballs and buy the box set. So
start this week right away with Sansa and Littlefinger.
Okay.
Like I said, that's where we're at, and this was a very interesting exchange with the two of them. And I think that you have to. I mean, it's obviously always good to see Littlefinger on screen. He's one of the best characters in the show, and you have to give him some respect for basically doing what Littlefinger does best, and that is just be like a cagey, manipulative guy. Like, even in the face of perhaps Brienne's going to murder him right now, he's like, he just doubles down, and he's like, you know what, I'll die for you if you want. He's like, that's what I've been saying this whole time.
Right. Yeah, that was definitely classic, like Littlefinger playing it exactly how he needed to play it, because he ultimately knew if he said that was the one thing he could say that would stop Sansa from actually killing him, and it worked. And of course she softened and said, well, just get out of my sight. I never want to see you again.
Yeah.
And pulled that old maneuver, which is like.
And it's interesting, that dynamic of Sansa basically like both of them knowing, like Sansa is like, gotta think, oh, he knows that I was totally raped, and she just wants it to say it, and he's just like skipping around it, and he knows, but he won't say it.
He's he plays a little bit of the was it legitimate rape or so
he's like, yeah, you were hit, were you were cut, did you feel a little gassy? He's just like guessing wildly. He's like, was hair pulled? Oh man, what a dick.
Yeah. So but speaking of Littlefinger, I mean, and here's the question is, what is his motivation at this point? Like, what exactly is his master plan? You assume he has one, right? I mean, he usually is a guy who's thinking multiple steps ahead on the chessboard. So
yeah, well, I don't think it was in his plan for her to have escaped. And so even with his thinking ahead, I think the success of Littlefinger always counts on his ability to pivot, when things don't exactly fall his way. So I don't know how he's going to react to this. He goes up to the wall and sort of wants to put that fire out and show his support, but I don't think he was counting on Sansa getting away. So this definitely throws a bit of a wrench into his plans, and I'm not sure where he's moving forward from here, or how he's moving forward from here.
And yeah, I mean, and even with, I guess he reached out to Sansa to say, like, let me pledge the Knights of the Vale to your cause. So what was his goal? What's his goal? What does he gain from that?
I don't know.
Does he just see that? Is it again? It's just backing the right horse. Is that he sees the downfall of the Boltons is going to be likely now, especially maybe that Ramsay has killed his father, who for whatever faults he had was definitely the more diplomatic, politically savvy, I think, of the Boltons. Ramsay is certainly a much more blunt instrument, and so maybe he sees, okay, Ramsay's he's gonna not go down easy, but he's gonna go down in the end, especially now that Sansa and Jon can rally people with the Stark name. So I want to be on the right side as usual.
Yeah, I think that's basically it at this point.
Okay.
Survive to to engage in machinations for another day, you know?
I could buy that. I mean, I just, given how much he has been behind so many of the big revelations or the big moments in this show, it just makes me wonder if there's not more to it. You know?
You're right. I wouldn't be surprised if he had something to do with, Small John Umber bringing Rickon to Ramsey, or
that was actually one of the car stars.
One of the car stars. Okay.
So how dare you mix up?
Oh, my Northerners! All Northerners look alike to me. I'm from the Summer Isles.
Yeah. Typical Summer Isle attitude. So anyway, is there any other things you wanted to touch base on with that storyline?
Nothing stuck out as far as the wall. After the wall, we go back to Arya, who I think for the third week straight is just like getting her ass handed to her by the stringy-haired blonde chick. Does that character have a name?
Yeah, her name is the Waif.
Okay.
That's what she's credited as. So, yeah, well, actually...
So, no, that's not a name.
Well...
I mean, sure.
She has a title?
Yeah, exactly. Wait a minute here, Kyle. Let's work this out.
Yeah, well, I mean, she actually did well against her when she was fighting blind last week during that montage, but... and even she's actually... sort of holds her own. I mean, ultimately loses.
There was like at some point during this last episode, there was an uppercut that looked like almost cartoonish. You know, it was like the end of a boxing movie when Rocky just like clearly floors the competition.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Waif definitely, I think, let her know what's up with that. It's definitely with dropping the stick and then taking her on barehanded against the kendo stick or whatever it was, and so the bow staff. And so, yeah, I think showing that, okay, yeah, you may have defeated me in the training montage, but I was not exactly going full force. So, and yeah, it's impressive for a blind girl, but I can still kick your ass anytime I want. Yeah, obviously we got to see a bit of the Bravosi theater, how those folks like to tread the boards. And
it's one of my favorite scenes from the whole episode. Was Arya watching as her family, or sort of all of the events that kind of led to her being where she is now, are just put on display in a very farcical manner. And it's just such an interesting idea of like watching your life, watching other people just laugh at all the tragedy that brought you here.
Yeah, and it's also kind of a fun commentary on how much things get distorted in the transmission, right, from the real events through history or whatever. Especially, I mean, this is only a few years ago that these events happened, and a relatively short distance away across the narrow sea. But I think particularly in a world like this, where your speed of communication is limited by Raven flight, you're naturally going to have a lot of degradation in terms of accuracy of the accounts, and also, who knows what the political motivations are behind somebody whose authorship of the play, what they're wanting to satirize, or certainly the you could think the Bravosi audience would probably want to see, they're the free people of Bravos, right? So probably see royalty in general as being buffoonish, because that would fit their mentality of their philosophy. So yeah, that was definitely a fun scene to see, and just to also see, like, sort of the cheap theatrics of the paper mache head or whatever getting thrown over the chair where he's squatting down behind, and just kind of low rent.
And a special shout out to the casting department once again. For picking, like, if you wanted to make a mockery of Ned Stark and really drive that point home, they picked, like, the most weak-chinned, bloated-faced dude to play that role. So that that had to hurt Arya. That hurt me watching it. I was like, oh, God, how dare they? And not only that, but it's so difficult, as a side note, to find actors of Peter Dinklage's stature that are any good. So not only did they land Dinklage, but the guy playing Dinklage or playing Tyrion actually pretty solid too. I was like, wow, there's like maybe 3 super tiny good actors in the entire world, and Game of Thrones landed 2 of them. So impressive.
We're going to get a lot of hate mail now from the tiny actors.
Oh, prove me wrong.
So, yeah, I think that, well, you know, and it's funny, too, because this is the second time that they've cast a Ned Stark type in the last 3 weeks, right? Because we saw young Ned Stark being played by a non-Sean Bean actor, of course, and then...
A non-Bean, if you will.
Yeah. and another non-Bean here in the role. I assume, unless Sean Bean has gone downhill a lot since he left the show, maybe he's done some heavy drinking.
Maybe they just never let him out, and they've been keeping him in a basement somewhere.
We're going to need you for this Bravos theater scene, so sorry.
Yeah, people don't think we have it figured out. They think we're just sort of writing as we go, but we've got it every single step.
But anyway, probably not too much more to talk about that. I mean, I don't know exactly where it's going. It seems like it's likely that this is going to cause the ultimate break between Arya and the Faceless Men. I would guess, just because, again, they need to get her moving out.
Yeah, she's been kind of stagnant. I mean, making small steps forward, but not in the way that other characters are really, like, leaping out of their positions, you know?
Yeah.
So this would be a good thing. Or, I mean, I think I personally am ready for it, you know? Let's get her either fully trained into hardcore Deadly Assassin mode and then send her out in the world, or let's have her, you know, some sort of schism be the impetus for her jumping on a ship.
Right. Yeah, maybe
the mainland.
You know, maybe the passing ship steered by Yara and Theon as she's on the run from the Faceless Men, something like that. Anyway, so, speaking of Yara and Theon and their ships,
Kingsmoots.
Yeah, got a little Kingsmoot action to talk about. Obviously, surprise candidacy. Well, not a surprise to us, I suppose, but Euron Greyjoy popping himself into the mix and sort of going full Donald Trump.
Yeah.
With the insult style campaigning. Pretty brief campaign.
Effective then, effective now.
Yeah. So, and winning over the 15 people who were attended the Kingsmoot. I don't know if these were just like super delegates or how it worked exactly, but
yeah, it does not seem like there's enough people there to go build an entire fleet of ships.
Yeah, that was
as commanded by him.
Yeah,
at the end, that seems like a logistics problem.
Yeah, that was definitely one of my notes. I said, as much money as Game of Thrones has, you'd think that they might have invested in a few more extras for the Pike scenes. It just seemed awfully sparse at all, not just the Kingsmoot, but yeah, at the end when I realized some of the people sailed away with Yara and Theon, and presumably they weren't all like hanging out there at the Kingsmoot, but when he says, you're going to go home and you're going to chop down every tree and you're going to have your wife sail or sew every sail. And they're like, yeah. And it was like 9 guys, you know?
Yeah, so, plus like I was thinking, chop down every tree. How many trees they got on this stony, craggy island?
Yeah.
All 4 trees are going?
Yeah, the idea of building an entire massive fleet, the largest the world's ever seen, out of the meager resources of Pike, and with 9 people, yeah, it seems a little bit of a Noah building the boat for all the animals situation, where you just not quite sure how the logistics work. You're like, yeah,
but you got to admire his enthusiasm. Let's go murder them.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah,
okay.
You also got to admire the completely eschewing all pretension on the Iron Islands. I mean, you know, even the Crown, just a shitty piece of driftwood, you know.
Yeah.
But not only do they drown you to test if you're going to be king, they don't even do any CPR. They just, hey, if he wakes up on his own, he's king. If he doesn't, It was not meant to be.
Yeah, you got to give him that. I mean, that's the sort of thing you have to do, because here's my larger issue with Euron is that he seems like he's shaping up to be, he sort of says all the requisite things like, there's a girl named Dany, I'm going to give her a dick, and you're like, okay, that guy sucks. And you're like, okay, so he's a villain. But when you drop in characters sort of this late into a show that's got characters with such rich histories, it makes you wonder how effective. Because there's like that note in my head that says, Euron, he's a bad dude. But like, do I care that much about him as an antagonistic force?
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. I think that's one of the challenges of the books, as perhaps you have noticed as well, is that Martin, even as late as Dance of Dragons, which is the 6th book in the series, keeps introducing new people, and you're just like, dude, stop bringing new people into the story. Yeah. Like, you already have too many characters that are stuck, in a rut. You need to deal with the existing characters, of which is getting unwieldy. So I don't have time to start caring about anybody new. I've been reading about these other people for 6 goddamn books. They're 1,200 pages long each. Yeah. So just focus on those people and getting their stories going or wrapped up or whatever.
Yeah, I'm still trying to muster up the strength to care about Jorah Mormont. Right. So if you could stop it.
So I think that is a challenge of both the books and the series. The series certainly has handled it better, partly by getting rid of a lot of those characters, or just not even introducing them in the first place. But
speaking of which, do you think we're ever gonna see? What are we gonna see from Dorne?
Yeah, I don't know.
Anything ever again?
It's possible that they will just cut it out. I mean, it wouldn't. Who knows? They'll probably work him in with some little
finger. I just figured it out.
That's his plan. Dorne will rise again. Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of, that they'll work them into some small role maybe before the show's over, but them playing a major role going forward, I think is unlikely, simply because, again, there's too many other things to deal with in this show. So, yeah, at some point you either have to start collapsing things together, as they've begun to do with certainly storylines like Jon and Sansa and Davos and Melisandre, all these people who, Brienne, are all coming together, although Brienne now looks like she's headed off onto another quest, hopefully with Tormund. She's
like the only person in the Seven Kingdoms that's really good at quests.
Right.
She's basically been doing it.
I mean, it did take her like 3 years to find Sansa, so I don't know.
But she got it done, man.
Good at quests. I mean, she's competent at quests.
Yeah, which is like good. We're grading on a curve here. I mean, she hasn't died yet.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, she hasn't died yet, which is not something you can say about too many Game of Thrones characters at this point. So I suppose that's a point.
That's in her all favor. The endorsement you need. Yeah.
But anyway, so hopefully she'll have Tormund at her side at least, so we can have that odd couple pairing.
Yeah, the sexiest couple on TV, the hardest I'm shipping anybody on television right now.
But where were we at? We were talking about
King's Moot and their scarcity of resources and just general populace.
But yeah, and even if they do have a bunch of trees on a part of the island we haven't seen, and way more workers than we have seen, and even though they can't even repair a bridge effectively, setting all that aside, it's still hard to it still seems like building a fleet of ships would take
a little more
time, a year or two. I mean, I've never
assume it takes 2 weeks, man. Yeah. It's not like they know where the other fleet's going. It seems like catching them is a crazy idea.
I mean, I don't think it's just about catching them. I think it's still just about doing their plan, regardless of whether they catch them. But it does, the timeline-wise, again, for it to fit with where the show's going, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. I mean, personally, I've never built a giant fleet of ships. So
I was led to this podcast under false pretenses, Kyle. I can't believe you're choosing now to reveal this.
Well, I knew there was only one way to get you in this room. So I knew you had a real hard-on for a shipbuilding. So I just had to tell a little white lie. But
Wait, is your last name not even Fleetmaker? God damn it, Kyle.
Well, I mean, I've considered changing it to Fleetmaker, so does that count for anything?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sure.
Okay. But like I said, I haven't done it, so maybe it's super easy and you can knock it out in a weekend. But that said, it seems like it would take longer from the tiny bit that I know about fleet making.
So do you think that Theon and his sister are now basically just like, oh, he talked about this Daenerys chick, that's where we're going, we're going to steal that idea. And, that's a woman ruler. We're behind the idea of a woman ruler. Let's get, some broads together and start busting heads. Do you think they're skipping down there?
Possibly. I mean, that would make a certain amount of sense as far as, again, bringing characters together, as we've talked about doing. I mean, I don't know what else they would do other than, just kind of go and maybe create like a kingdom in exile sort of thing, and then try to storm Pike and retake the throne for Yara at some point in the future. But again, it's like, does the story really have time for that kind of internecine struggle at this point in the narrative? I don't think they do.
The correct answer is no. It does not.
Okay. So we'll see. We've I don't know, plot wise, I think at this point, is there anything else you want to talk about before we jump to the end? I mean, there's a ton to talk about at the end. So,
well, one thing I'd like to bring up is the whole thing that's going. Obviously, we sort of just get like a quick check in on Dany and Jorah, and he does the whole, my arm is falling off and rotting sort of thing.
Yeah,
and then
the classic. My arm is turning to stone, and
the thing you've seen time and time.
Yeah,
again.
and I'll kill myself before I go totally crazy. That one.
Yeah.
That old
chestnut.
Exactly.
So, blah blah. But what was interesting? One quick thing I wanted to touch on was the exchange between Varys and whoever Melisandre's doppelganger was, which I thought was one of the highlights of the show too. Just sort of watching Varys get uncomfortable with the guy who's usually been like keeping the secrets. The secrets are his, stock and trade, and she's sort of telling him some things that he might not know she knows, and that whole exchange was pretty great. But all I kept thinking, as soon as I saw the Melisandre doppelganger and her very pert and perky bosom, was like, how old them titties? How old them titties underneath that?
That's funny because all I could think was, where do I get one of those ruby necklaces?
Yeah. Kyle's been on a long quest to conceal his dick age.
I would like to have a perky bosom. I mean,
who wouldn't?
Yeah. So, but I it's true. I was wondering that myself. I think we're all suspect of the Red Priestesses now, but also not totally caring.
Yeah,
because just keep that necklace on and we're all good.
Everything's fine.
Yeah, we're all looking good. But yeah, that was an interesting setup for a couple of reasons, because we got a little bit teasing a bit of Varys' backstory there with, he certainly seemed very uncomfortable with the insinuations she was making about a voice speaking from the flames as his poor child parts were burning on the fire. And, this is, with the way he reacted, certainly struck a chord with him. So, is that something that's going to come up later? It seems like it most likely will. And there's just this general idea of religion, which, has been kind of at the edges of the show, but hasn't necessarily taken a front and center role to this point, but feels like it might more and more. We saw.
Do you mean religion is in like actual magic-based religion? Because obviously the High Sparrow's been around here for a hot second.
I guess so. I guess you're right. So maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe the show has been moving in that direction for the last season or so. But yeah, But I think we're seeing more and more now with the Red Priestess and this idea of we talked about last week that Danny, you I think said the words that her walking out of the fire is the kind of thing that you could see starting a religion. And so we had that kind of religious iconography ending last week's episode, and now we're parlaying, even though at this point Tyrion doesn't even know about that, or Varys, but they're sort of parlaying it into this idea of treating her as the princess that was promised, I guess. This figure that coming to serve the Lord of Light and all this stuff, but you definitely see the dark side of that, and where you are perhaps making allies with forces that could easily get out of control. As they had the great line where the woman said something about purifying the non-believers, and Tyrion said something like, well, we may want to hold back a little on purifying all the non-believers, because Daenerys rules over people of many faiths, and just kind of this idea that, okay, yeah, we want the whole like goddess thing to be played up, but maybe not so much the religious zealotry murdering non-believers part. But it's like, you don't always get to choose, right? Like, once you start going down that path, there are consequences to ideas. And this is the case, of course, in the real world religion as well. But so I don't know how much they're going to explore that, but it definitely seems like something that they're introducing as an element which we could see explored in a lot greater detail. And with the faith militant on the other side of the ledger, it's taking definitely a much more active role in how it shapes this world that we're in, and how for the faith militant is actually a good example, because this was a thing where, again, Cersei said, okay, another Lannister in this case wanted to use it for her purposes, just as Tyrion doesn't give a shit about the Lord of Light. He doesn't believe in it, but he sees this as useful for his purposes. And the last Lannister that saw that had it very quickly spin out of control. Right. So maybe we'll see the same thing.
Yeah, maybe. But I think this is a good chance for the show to emphasize like how much more adept at this like Tyrion is than Cersei, and the difference it makes when you have an actual strong ruler. Because like when Dany does show up, I don't think she's going to be putting up with any of this red priestess bullshit, man. That broad's going to be dragon food.
Perhaps.
I'm throwing it out there.
All right.
So on to.
I have a bit of another theory, but I'll
no, let's hear it.
No. It ties in with some of the stuff I have to talk about later. So cool. We will circle back to it, sir.
So then we're going to get to the lead that we've buried, the thing that everybody's going to remember from this episode, of course, in classic, what's come to be known as classic Game of Thrones fashion of sort of, some fairly interesting stuff for the vast majority of the episode, and then like some really crazy stuff at the end.
Yep. And I don't know. I assume that you found that it was getting a little dusty in that room where you're watching the show at the end. Just maybe a little lint in the eye or something. Had to wipe away a few.
I had been cutting a lot of onions earlier in the evening.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we can jump. We might as well jump right ahead to the gut punch of the week, right? Because there's no question. I think what it is, which is, of course, the final sequence in this episode where we say goodbye to our stalwart friend Hodor, and just really incredibly well done. Final sequence, particularly all the stuff involving Hodor. And incredibly affecting. I mean, I really, it surprised me how much I ended up caring, right, about this. Like, not that I wouldn't care, but it impacted me in a much more significant way. I mean, I really choked up, and like even just thinking about it later, I would find myself kind of choking up. Like, because days later. Go ahead.
Well, I think that a big part of it is because not so much like the sacrifice of holding a door in and of itself is a very visceral scene of watching a guy getting torn apart. But it's a real testament to how well this show can be written to essentially within the last couple episodes give you all the backstory that you need on Hodor, and in the very same episode where you kill him, explain like that not only has he been killed, but he has been like mentally time raped or you know or whatever. Like that, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot to unpack. Aside from just like, it's not just like a loyal dog. It's not, you know, the Summer jumping into the fray and getting torn apart. Like this whole, like, this is a really important, this whole episode is really, I think, important at establishing that Bran, much like his brothers and sisters have done throughout the series, is also pretty fallible and also has like hard lessons to learn, like beyond, you know, don't go climbing windows. Or you get your back broken. Like, that was something he learned a while ago. But other than that, like, he hasn't really been fucking up as the show has progressed. And this is an instance in which, like, he's definitely, like, gonna have some things to mull over for, like, the rest of his days.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, right. Like, if you look at it on the surface, you see the scene, and it's this hardworking, loyal guy sacrificing himself for his, you know, to save others, which is always an affecting moment, right? Anytime you see that in a film or a television show. But I think that the layer that really makes this so tragic and more affecting is the fact that he wasn't doing it voluntarily. You know, it was I mean, basically Hodor, while loyal and hardworking, was a coward and a pacifist, and would never, you know, do that on his own. Like, so he was being forced against his will to hold this door. And then you had, of course, this idea, I think you had the idea of basically the three-eyed raven downloading all of his knowledge and powers into Bran, making Bran presumably 1,000 times more powerful than he was before that. And I assume that's what created this connection between the time periods, this sort of time tunnel that allowed Mira's voice to carry, and then, you know, presumably the horror of that moment to somehow carry backwards through time into Hodor's brain, and then scramble it to the point to where that's all he could say. And that's, yeah, I mean, just the fact that, you know, his entire life was shaped by this one single moment in which he had no agency in, is extremely tragic when you think about it. I mean, this is like, you know, this you talk about a
guy that had no agency in it, and a guy that was totally normal, like, prior to it. It's not like he was a dolt from birth, and then it was like, oh, we're gonna need this dolt, you know, like years down the road. It's like, no, we just need someone huge. So go ahead and, like you said, scramble this guy's brain.
Right. And all of which, you know, Bran didn't necessarily do on purpose, although I suppose he did sacrifice Hodor on purpose at the end, which will be interesting to see how he deals with that. Because, as you said, I mean, that's a tough thing. I mean, Hodor was was somebody that he certainly cared for and considered a friend and a loyal companion. And it was necessary to save himself. But
yeah, you might even see moving forward this idea of this being the thing that keeps Bran, because now that, okay, if we assume that Bran is immensely more powerful, well, then he's going to have to put himself in check, or else, you know, maybe he just like goes into, you know, Ramsay Bolton's head and takes him over and like makes him throw himself out a window, or like maybe he just does that against like any opposition, you know, in the Seven Kingdoms in order to unite them. But perhaps this is a moment where he goes, you know what, I took over a dude's mind, and that wasn't a cool thing to do, and so I'm like not going to do that again. We'll have to find another way. Maybe this is a way of them not only saying like Bran has this power, but also of reining that power in, so he doesn't become like Superman, you know?
Right. Yeah, I could see that. Sort of recognizing the power responsibility matrix and how he should handle that going forward. You know, another thing that immediately jumps to mind going forward immediately from this moment is, while again it was certainly a a strong scene in the moment of him holding that door and making that sacrifice. How effective
That
of a
is
plan
the big problem.
Is it really? Because like he can't hold the door forever. Like we could
Right.
see that he was sort of on
It's
the
like legions and legions
Right.
behind these guys, and they're just running out into the snow. It's like, what?
Yeah, with a cripple on a sled. It's not like and as we saw, we've seen before, and particularly in this episode, those whites and the walkers could move pretty fast.
Yeah.
So it's however much time he bought them, like what's the we could always see they were busting through the door and getting a hold of Hodor. Like how much more time can they possibly buy before he's killed and they come rushing through that door, and then what happens next, right? How do they escape at that point? Unless Bran has some other kind of power, like he can make them fly or something, and but if he can do that, then why did Hodor have to die, right? So that's the thing, is that Hodor's death is going to be even more painful if it's essentially meaningless, right? Like if the Horde just catches up with them almost immediately, and then they have to be saved in some other fashion, whether it's someone else riding to the rescue or Bran using some kind of power or whatever that happens. It's like, oh yeah, so then why do we have to sacrifice Hodor?
Yeah, exactly. Do you think what about Cold Hands?
Yeah, right. That's something I've heard.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I at least one thing I read mentioned that as a possibility.
You just can't say a goddamn original thing in this world.
You can't. But that's a possibility. I mean, as for people who aren't book readers, there is a character named Cold Hands in the book who appears much earlier in the books as a companion who helps Bran and that group, Amira and so on and so forth. But and it seemed as if he was just not going to be in the show, and he still may not be. I mean, who the hell knows? But this would be a place you could imagine inserting him, because they do seem to need help at this moment. So we'll see. A very mysterious figure in the book. A lot of speculation as to what his identity might be, including speculating that he is the late Benjen Stark.
Yeah, I was always in that camp.
Yeah, so
it does seem like the most obvious conclusion.
But we'll see. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. But tough moment, tough way to go out for Hodor. Of course, also Summer going out
unceremoniously too.
Yeah, the dire wolves really dropping like
flyer wolves.
He beat me to it. So, but yeah, we're down 4 of the 6 now are dead. So I know there's some big dire wolf fans out there. They're probably none too happy. We certainly have seen. I mean, really. They've all been dispatched pretty unceremoniously, right? Like we don't see the death of Rob. What was Rob's direwolf's name? Do you remember?
Greywind?
Yeah, I think it was something like that. Yeah. I don't think it was Greywind, but it was
Greymane?
It was. I think it was Wind. But anyway, but yeah, his I think we just see the head, on Rob's body. I think they'd sewed it onto his body, right? And they're marching him through the streets. Yeah. We also just see a severed head of Shaggy Dog. Although I know there's some Shaggy Dog truthers out there.
Yeah, perhaps I was going to say, not actually Shaggy Dog.
Right, that suspect that the Karstarks are somehow playing a long game, and that Shaggy Dog, that was too small to be a true direwolf head. So
that's definitely the kind of movement you would expect behind something like this. People are so hilariously nitpicky and want so desperately to believe that they're seeing the truth. They're just like, well, if you go back 3 seasons and look at the relative dimensions, and they're just like, really, really reading into it. It's possible they're right, but
people love them some direwolf. What can you say? Lady obviously dispatched by the Hound, and he killed her, right?
Yeah.
The Hound, yeah. And then we have just Summer, of course, who we saw being torn apart by whites in this episode. So that leaves, of course, our old friend Ghost and Nymeria, who is in the wind, perhaps to be seen again, perhaps not. Arya's direwolf.
What's your take on the symbolism here? Do you think there's a direct correlation? Do you think when these dogs die, it is symbolic of their owner's death or eventuality of their owner's death? Or do you think it's just a thing?
I don't think so. I mean, who the hell knows?
It seems weird to have kept Summer around. Like, that's the thing is, like, I really didn't care for Summer's death at all. I didn't feel like it was deserving, because I remember, like, the build-up, specifically in the books, it's like all of Bran, coming back into consciousness, and then, that's the first words he says when he wakes up after his fall, and so it seemed like the connection between those two, Bran and Summer, was something really important, and it kind of just got tossed aside, like a used tissue in Summer's death, and that was a bummer for me. That might have been a bigger gut punch than Hodor, just not like emotionally, but just in the way that I felt like it was kind of mishandled.
Yeah. Yeah, perhaps. I think that with the direwolves, it's hard to say, like, what is the way they've been handled. One of the things I've read is that this idea that the show just didn't really have the effects budget to do the direwolves right, and so they've had to keep them at a minimum for that reason, and therefore they haven't been as developed as characters as they were in the books. And I mean, maybe, but like, it seems like the show has a lot of money and there's quite a few effects,
right,
and dragons and stuff. I mean, are the direwolves that hard to do? They doesn't seem like crazy. And honestly, I mean, like how stuck are people on the direwolves being, like, first off, a direwolf's not a real thing, right? I mean, I know it was like a prehistoric animal or something, but it's not like, people can say, well, that's not a realistic direwolf, right?
Right.
Like can't they just find like relatively big wolves or just, use, again, sort of the shoot things like with the proper angles or a scale or whatever to create the impression of them being a little larger, and then we'll all be fine with it. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't seem like that's like I would get too tied up in, well, these direwolves aren't quite big enough to be real direwolves. I mean,
right.
So
I mean, people will get nitpicky about that shit, but yeah. You can't imagine that Weiss and Benioff are that can't be the reason that they're kept out.
Yeah, yeah, it never really sat right with me as far as being a reason. So who knows? But they are we are losing them rapidly. So I mean, there's really only one, again, that's present in the show at this point, and that's Ghost.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about Nymeria, but it is interesting. I'm really excited, just like in this moment of perhaps Arya reconnecting with her, as like the Wolf Queen with her roaming packs, back on the mainland. That could be an exciting thing.
So another lingering question from the inn there is, with Bran and them escaping, like, even if they are somehow able to, like, go around a bend or something and not be seen by the
it's like
walkers
the classic
anymore.
movie escape where you like fall down a cliff and then you just roll and somehow you roll safely down an entire cliff, and then there's the armies behind you.
Right. Like, so even if they do that kind of maneuver, what's the deal with this mark that Bran has from the Night's King? Like, like, is that like permanent GPS now? I mean, they obviously
it allowed him entrance into that sacred, most sacred of sacred places. So you got to figure, Bran's like, he's got to be crossing an ocean like right quick. That seems to be the only thing that's going to get him out of there. They can't stay on that continent at all.
You would think so, that they would be able to locate him again pretty quickly with that mark. So that's another problem that we'll see how they address, unless it's a one-time use thing, like,
right. It just starts to fade.
Right.
That'd be convenient. It's the henna tattoo of homing beacons.
All right. So this is something that I really want to talk about with regards to this. This, I think, is a good segue in. Speaking of the walkers and their powers, is, I've really been thinking a lot about the walkers and their motivations lately, and particularly after this episode.
Yeah. You're like, white lives matter.
Yeah, I think isn't there a hashtag for that or something? But we start out the pilot episode of this series, and there's a walker basically really close to the wall, right? Because we see that on that opening scene, those guys are pretty close to the wall. They're just north of the wall, and they cross back over to the other side, and the one guy deserts the Night's Watch. Ned chops his head off, that whole thing, right? So walkers are already in the vicinity when this show starts. Now, maybe that was a scout. Who knows? Whatever. Okay. By end of second season, we see an entire walker army marching towards the wall. Sam's hiding behind the boulder, right? Well, Sam gets back to the wall. He wasn't like 1,000 miles away. Like, he gets back to the wall. The walker army never shows up. I don't know where they were going exactly. Now we see them, of course, at the end of last season at Hardhome, which is very close to the wall, like the closest major settlement to the wall or north of the wall. And again, they seem to be there in force. And yet the season comes and they're still not, making any kind of assault on the wall. And so, you really start wondering, like, this seems very intentional is my point. Like, it's not like it's just taking them this long to get there. Like, they've been able to be there for a long time. And you also have to wonder, there's other puzzling questions that come up. For example, can the walkers, not just swim around the wall? Because the wall is, it only stretches to the end of the land, and there's water on either side. The wall's not that thick, so even if they can't climb over it for some reason, which again, in and of itself doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. We've already seen humans climb over it multiple times, and for creatures that seem to be fairly agile at climbing, as we saw in this episode, and we've seen other things, and who have obviously no concern for their own safety, you think that they could make it over the wall, but even if they can't do that, like, it seems that they could easily swim around. And if maybe they can't go in water, I don't know. We did see at the end of Hardhome, they all stopped at the water. So maybe they have some kind of weakness, but can they not build boats? I don't know. So there's a lot of questions. And I think
they can't build boats. All of the boat builders live on Pike.
Oh yeah. So maybe
nobody can build boats.
Maybe that's the plan of Yara and Theon, is to ally with the walkers.
Oh yeah, I like it.
They can bring the boats over to them. So anyway, so the more you think about it, it's kind of weird, right, that the walkers haven't already made some kind of assault on Castle Black or the North in general,
right? At
least, and so I'm wondering about there seems to be very intentional by them, and I'm wondering about their motivations, and I'm wondering, like, maybe if you think about it from this perspective, right, the walkers very much fit into that classic fantasy mold of the marauding evil army that is just sort of pure evil and bent on death and destruction for its own sake, which is something we've seen in
Sauron's army, right,
over and over again. We see this in fantasy literature. It's one of the classic things. But certainly Martin's books have over and over again shown that he likes to turn these traditional fantasy genre on its head. He likes to take things and invert them. And we've seen it with all kinds of things. He also is someone who definitely likes to dabble in the shades of gray. There's not these pure evil characters. There's not pure good characters. People occupy this gray space in the middle. So over and over again. So really the walkers don't fit into that at all. So it makes me start thinking more and more, like, maybe they're not that. Maybe the walkers are just misunderstood in some way. Maybe they have some plan that they see a greater good. Maybe they understand some threat that the humans don't see, or maybe some threat that the humans are posing to the world at large, that they're actually having to deal with. And you can start looking at, I think if you, this all could be crazy, I don't know, but you start looking at some of the other things we've talked about in this episode, like Bran, taking on these incredibly dangerous powers that could be used for great evil, potentially, and has already mind raped a stable boy effectively with and driven him to his death. If you look at Danny possibly getting in legion with religious zealots and having an army of dragons.
People that use blood magic, man.
Right. So maybe the characters who we've thought are the good ones and we're rooting for pose some kind of danger to the world. Yeah,
it's sort of like, even the Children of the Forest were basically like, yo, we created these walkers because you dudes are like out of control.
Right.
And so maybe they're just living up to their purpose. Maybe dudes is out of control.
Right.
And we need these walkers here to keep them in check, so we don't end up with just fucking dragons burning everything.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what I'm wondering. I mean, that would not surprise me just based on what we know. I put it this way: I would be very surprised if it turns out they're as simplistic as this mindless, marauding horde.
But then, okay, counterpoint. Why do they look so janky if they're not evil, man? Well, that's like sometimes you look at a guy and you're like, yo, Ted Cruz is just straight up evil. I can tell by the way that he is.
Well, come on. I mean, let's be fair to the walkers. I mean, they're not like Ted Cruz.
That's a very extreme
ugly.
Example. Right.
That's I mean, apologies to White Walkers and whites everywhere.
That's right.
We walk that back on the pod couple, but yeah, I mean, you do look a little rough around the edges. So I think that, well, obviously that just fits into why they'd be misunderstood, right?
True.
So who knows? I mean, maybe they're not going there at all. But
yeah, you kind of, I mean, you hope that they are, though. It would be a great move and in keeping with the story as a whole and sort of all the reasons that we really like Game of Thrones and why it's one of the best, if not the best, fantasy series going, because of all of the way that it subverts your expectations time and time again. So definitely something to keep an eye out for, something I will be looking for signs of, probably like a shaggy dog truther.
All right, well, before we hit up our triad of the week, one other thing I wanted to touch on that I thought about this week was this with Castle Black and Jon does it seem like the show is blowing past Jon's death and resurrection a little too cavalierly? I just think about no one really seems to react to it like it's that big of a deal. And look, I know everyone's seen some shit at this point. So yeah, but still, like it's the event in itself. I mean, resurrection is not something that
right. Like it'd be one thing if Beric Dondarrion was like cliche,
right?
Seen that shit before. But yeah, for like. I mean, it's like great for Sansa that, she finally gets to see her brother after all this time. But you do think they would have like a sit down, like, so wait, you were dead, like dead,
right?
Like dead for days, dead.
Yeah, and like how has it changed you? How do you feel differently? Right. And the way that the show had treated it, because gave you the sense that maybe she didn't even know. But in this episode, we get that offhand remark by Brienne. Mm-hmm. That's like, well, he does seem a bit brooding, but I guess that's understandable given the circumstances, which again seems very just loose and off the cuff for something that you would have a little more awe of, you would think. So absolutely. But it's not. It doesn't just end with them. It's the whole everybody. I mean, we're talking about the wildlings or the
Dolorous Ed seems just as bewildered that he's like the commander of the Night's Watch.
Right.
It's like equal levels of confusion on his part.
Even more so.
Yeah.
I would say. It's just that everyone just kind of is like, well, all right. I mean, dude's back from the dead. What are you gonna do?
Like Dany walked out of a burning building. She didn't even die, and then she suddenly just had throngs of people like just on their knees, like just crying tears, like people just passing out. It was like British Beatlemania. And then like Jon literally comes back from the dead and people are like, ho hum, such is life at the wall.
And furthermore, I mean, setting aside everyone's reactions, which again do seem underwhelmed by what would be a pretty big deal, presumably. But also just even Jon, like it doesn't seem to have the ramifications yet. I mean, maybe they'll build some later as far as him going through that ordeal changing him. I mean, other than him seeming perhaps a little more moody or morose, he just seems like he's the same dude.
Yeah, but
right?
he's like, yeah, it's like he's moody and morose because he was killed.
Right.
Not like due to anything that happened afterwards. We haven't had any kind of indication that something changed within him at all.
Right.
Like there's no he might have brought something back. There's no he was, he got touched by the speed force and saw like all of the lines connecting. Like there's really nothing. He's dead. He said that there was nothing. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's just like to him, it's just like being blackout drunk. And people are like, "Can you believe you did this?" And you're like, "Well, I can't because I was blackout drunk. I don't remember any of it, so it can't actually affect me."
Is that something that you can relate to in any way?
No, me?
Yeah.
No, man. Come on. I've been sober for like 36 hours.
Okay. What happened before those 36 hours?
I can't really tell you.
So, yeah. I mean, I'd like to have some kind of. I mean, they didn't even talk about that a little bit. I guess John said something like there was nothing. When someone said something about what's on the other side, and that was the end of it. But yeah, I would almost like there to be some kind of Lovecraftian existential horror that he encountered that warped his brain in some way and makes him carry these psychic scars forward. And that just doesn't seem what they're going. They really do. It's just like he was hurt real bad.
Yeah.
He was on, he got stabbed and he bled a lot, but they, brought him back at death's door or something.
Maybe that's how he rationalizes it. I mean, maybe he doesn't, maybe he likens it to something more of like a coma or, just being severely knocked out.
Yeah. That's certainly the way the show's treated so far, which again is a little disappointing to me for something that was such a big deal.
Yeah.
Something that we had to wait all.
I agree. It'll be interesting to see
resolved.
if Bran and Jon meet up. Perhaps they will pursue this road of something that Jon's been blocking this whole time, or maybe Bran, given his mystic powers, will be able to just like immediately recognize that something is different about Jon, even if Jon himself doesn't know it. Or
maybe Bran's already inside Jon, and that's how he came back.
Could be
Bran from the future. Mm-hmm. With his super warg powers now.
Yeah, that would explain why he's not really reacting to stuff, right? It's just Bran.
Yeah.
Anyone that dies gets brought back as Bran.
Bran is actually operating all the characters in the show. That's the big reveal. The Walkers, the Lannisters, the Starks, everybody. It's all just Bran.
This tree's got a lot of roots.
It's all in Bran's head.
Is it Tommy Westfall?
Yeah.
Nice.
The final episode is just Bran waking up from a dream. I think that would be satisfying for everybody.
Yeah, that's what the show's built. Callback. I feel like this episode's light on callbacks.
Oh yeah, so we'll just start yelling out the word callback.
That's the best I could do given the circumstances.
Okay. Yeah. So hopefully it's all just a weirwood dream from Bran. That's what I'm going for. But yeah, let's move on to our triad of the week. I guess I don't have a better name for it. Do you?
Nope. Okay,
great. So
callback.
A callback of the week? That doesn't make any sense.
No.
But yeah, let's talk about that. I guess obviously we've already discussed the gut punch being Hodor, of course, with possible honorable mention to Summer. One thing that I was before we move on to the badassery and the comedic moment that I'll say about that moment is one of the reasons I think it hit me hard, besides all the stuff we've already discussed, is that this was the first big moment like that we didn't see coming, right? Because as brutal as the beheading of Ned Stark or the Red Wedding, some of these other things were, we knew they were coming because we had read the book. So this is the first time that
there's that realization that all bets are off, right?
Right, for you or I at least, where something was able to truly surprise us in a way that that wasn't possible before because of being spoiled by the books effectively. And so I think that's another reason why it hit me hard. And yeah, it does make me a little jealous for those moments that the non-book readers got to have, earlier. And so even though we got to have those with the books, technically, it's just not the same. The books just can't have the same visceral impact, at least I don't believe, as film can when it's done well, which certainly these scenes were done well in this show. But yeah, so and I suppose we have more to look forward to with that as the show moves on here, since we, for the most part, are completely away from the books. Now, do you have a badassery of the week?
Well, I just thought, really, honestly, it was the opening with Sansa coming at Littlefinger, sort of guns blazing, and it was badass in her again continuing down this road of just, now that she's out from under the thumb of any sort of controlling influence, now that there are no tyrants grabbing her by the neck, she's really established herself as like a take no prisoners, no holds barred, no nonsense kind of lady. She's really stepping into those Catelyn shoes. Continues to do so, and it's just been great to watch her do that. As a side note, again, I think that Littlefinger doing exactly what he needed to do was pretty badass in its own right. It wasn't, like Clegane skull smashing badass, but it was just a reminder of how he's gotten to this point, by how he's constantly not able to just survive in this crazy world that kills everybody, but how he's able to manipulate it to his own, to his own desires. So,
yeah, those are good choices. Certainly going a bit more subtle with the badassery, kind of coming at it with the chisel, whereas I'm looking at it more with a hammer here, going with the child of the forest suicide bombing herself.
Yeah.
Assuming did the children of the forest have genders? I'm not totally sure. Sam seems like a female actress.
I don't know. I guess we'll find out when they try to use a restroom in Tennessee.
Damn it! Once again. Oh, I guess I set you up for that one, just to steal it away. So anyway, but the child of the forest suicide bombing herself, and taking out a fair number of whites with her, which was a fun scene. I do think that I would give the honorable mention in that same sequence to Mira for taking out a walker with the spear presumably tipped with either dragon glass or Valyrian steel. I don't know which. I don't know where she got that spear from. Is that her spear? Like that she's had?
I want to say yes.
And I know I think she's had a spear as her primary weapon.
She did seem surprised that it worked, which makes me think it's probably Valyrian steel.
Yeah, and of course the bad part is she didn't retrieve it, right? Didn't it just kind of get stuck in the walker's throat, and then she had to run away? But I think anytime you kill a walker,
yeah, that's true. You're automatically in the Hall of Fame,
right? That's right. Promoted straight to the Badass Hall of Fame. So so those are both good moments for that. Again, much more over the top than your head game type moments, but I think they all fit the bill here. So, comedic moment of the week.
I think the whole play as a whole. Again, Game of Thrones not shying away from fart jokes this season. Apparently, they're just going straight for it, and I love like the belaboring of it. Like, that it's not funny in and of itself. It's just funny because all of these people are like just losing their shit over like a ridiculous farce. It was a bittersweet comedic moment, but just that whole exchange is definitely a great way of sort of the minds behind the show to kind of make fun of themselves and see like and us as the audience, like, look how wrapped up we get in this make believe, so
yeah. It's funny because my comedic moment of the week is along very similar lines, talking about using first off the troop, the dramatic troop from that sequence, and Benioff and Weiss essentially trolling the audience, right? Because there has been, or trolling their critics, I suppose. There's been some criticism of Game of Thrones being exploitative of women, with a lot of female nudity of a salacious variety. So what do they give us in this episode? A nice tight close-up of a dick. Which that was pretty funny. Because you know that was not an accident. They're going, all right, a little too much female nudity for you?
Yeah.
How about this? How about some Franken beans? Nice and tight.
Yeah, it is true, man. I didn't even think about it from that context, but that makes total sense. And it's like, it was a jarring thing that didn't have like any payoff whatsoever, like to the story, you know.
Right.
Not as yet, but it is just like, being cast for that part.
I do, yeah.
Good news is you're on Game of Thrones.
Yeah. So, can we see your goods here? Can you pull, like, this is a weird casting couch situation. I didn't think I would need that for this. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I guess to be seen. Maybe what's going to happen with those warts, you know? Maybe they're going to play a big role. Maybe it's the beginning of Dragon Scale. And he'll find the cure, and Jorah can pass it on to Jorah.
So Arya has to shave off the warts from the penis in order to poison that broad.
Yeah.
They're always one step ahead of us, Kyle.
Servant girl, get in here. Got a job for you. Yeah. Well, we'll look forward to that scene next week. And on that note, I don't know what else can we talk about. We now that we're talking about male genitalia and total dicks, I guess it's time for politics.
Time for politics. That's a segue, bro.
That is a segue. So, as we mentioned last week, if you were listening, this is not going to be your typical political segment. We, instead of talking about sort of the current events and the presidential race, as we have mostly focused on for the previous weeks,
that's gotten boring.
Yeah. We're going to focus on a book that we talked about last week, which is Political Realism. It's a short little ebook, 55 pages, really like a long essay by Jonathan Rauch. And really, this is a book that I had read a while ago, and I reread in this last week for the podcast. Steve read it as well, and I feel like it's real fresh for you. Is that
like right there in my brain, dude?
It's like, do you feel like it's?
It feels like I read it just today.
Like, does it feel like you read it in the car on the way over?
It's something very, that you know, there's a hint of truth to that, in that it's totally true. Yeah.
So anyway, so hopefully, since the 36 hours when you last blacked out, you'll remember some parts of it anyway.
Oh yeah.
And
then I started drinking again just a second ago, but
oh, okay.
Well, you know.
Well, do you want me to read it again? You talk
about it for a minute, and I'm going to start it over.
Should we pause this? Page 1.
You did read this book twice.
Yeah. So you probably should too.
Can you tell me what it's about?
Yeah. Well, so just for the listeners who didn't read it, just to give you a basic idea, the book is making the argument that the political system inherently has a tremendous amount of friction in it. You've got all these different parties who are often working at cross purposes, and not just, you know, Democrats and Republicans. This is focused on the U.S. political system, but not just Democrats and Republicans, of course, but even within party, you've got different actors who have different interests, different things they're pushing for, different ideals, different ideologies, and all these different things, and of course also divided government, different branches, different committees, so on and so forth. So it creates a tremendous amount of friction as all these people are working often against each other, or even if going in somewhat in the same direction, wanting to do it in different ways, so on and so forth. So the argument is that what you need in a situation with all that friction is some kind of lubricant, and that the only thing that has really been effective is basically machine-like parties who are able to work in what they call transactional politics. And it's sort of a transactional politics, something that has a bit of a dirty word, and it has a bad reputation as being synonymous with corruption. But the argument here is that it's a pretty innocent form of quote unquote corruption, and it's a necessary form with you when you have people who have when you have all these people working at cross purposes. The only way to get them on the same page is to have them be able to trade some things. You need to be able to say, okay, I'll give up a little bit of this. You can have a little bit of that. Sometimes maybe it's getting a bridge or something for your constituents. Sometimes maybe it's getting a certain plank in the platform. So whatever. There's all these different things but you have to be able to make deals. You have to be able to make compromises, and that's something that is enormously harder when you don't have the possibility when you demonize transactional politics, which is sort of what's happened in our current system. Is this idea that these things, basically. The worst excesses of those transactional politics would be represented by something like Tammany Hall, and there were certainly necessary reforms to get rid of that level of corruption. But
maybe explain what Tammany Hall is.
Oh, okay. So Tammany Hall was like,
for the layman. I looked it up.
Oh, okay.
So I know what it is.
Well, yeah, it's basically in New York politics, like early.
Remember Gangs of New York?
Yeah,
Tammany Hall.
Right. Basically, this idea of these power brokers that are use patronage and all these political powers to hey you vote for our guy and you do this and you get these favors and so on and so forth, but to a very extreme degree, and taking payoffs and all this stuff. So there were certainly excesses that need to be scaled back. But going
why every person in America today thinks that they're of Irish descent, so they get crazy drunk on St. Patrick's Day? Tammany Hall. That's why.
So not all bad. But this idea that the reformers have gone so far, and you have to with ideological purity and transparency, all these things that has essentially eliminated the wiggle room needed to make transactional politics work. Which is basically the only way that politics can work in the real world. And it's also weakened the parties to where they're not able to function with the carrots and sticks needed to keep things moving along, and work on the long game that crosses not just one election, but two, but three, but four, generational elections, basically. And so anyway, that's the basic idea of the book, is saying that, maybe we need more, not less, of political hacks, of transactional politics, of smoky back rooms, where you can make deals, and that this is the lubricant that keeps the government working. And while it'd be great if, we have this high-minded ideal of public servants all just getting together and deciding for the common good on one, best thing for the country, that's not realistic. That's not how the real world works. And so this is the kind of thing that you need. And so anyway, that's, like I said, that's the premise. I probably rattled on for way too long, but wanted to give some context.
That's a good context
for the group. And now since I've, like I said, it was the one who recommended it and suggested it, I would certainly like to get your thoughts, sir.
Well, it's a quick and interesting read. Certainly, if you, I don't think that you have to be too entrenched in the world of politics. I don't count myself among people that are. I never took a poli-sci class anywhere in my history, and so I still was able to follow along. It's there's some ideas in the book that I certainly agree with, and some premises that are set up. Sort of one thing that jumps to mind immediately is this idea that when, as Rauch calls them, when the machines don't work, then shadow machines rise to take their place, which is to say that if the political system in its current incarnation is limited because of transparency or because of because of idealism, then that doesn't necessarily mean that politics gets cleaner. It in fact gets messier, because if a political candidate has to limit the amount of donations he takes, but there's no limitation on a separate company setting up a campaign fund in their name, then that actually dirties the pool as opposed to preserving the idea of democracy. So that's something I think that's a fine point that the book makes, and something that I think we can easily see happening today. The book doesn't do a whole lot to talk about practical solutions, and it seems like Rausch is very careful to even put forth like a set number of solutions. He talks about the example at the end of the book with in Utah, where some people got together, church leaders, gay rights activists, and also members of Utah politicos or whatever. But and now they hammered out a deal that was fairly progressive and sort of left all sides unhappy, but still pushed the agenda forward, which seems to be what transactional politics is all about, is compromise. It's nobody gets what they want, but everybody gets something, moving forward. And other than that, there's not too many examples of it effective, being effective in the world today. So that's kind of where I was left with the book is, like, what specific steps do we need to take beyond the scope of he wants to bring back earmarks, but just make sure that they're well regulated. And he wants less transparency because he finds that's inhibitive. But beyond that, it doesn't seem like a super well laid out manifesto.
Well, I think also the idea of changing the campaign finance rules so that money can go funneled into the parties. I think a lot of it's about strengthening the parties.
Yeah,
and that's certainly one of the major ways is to allow contributions to the parties to be increased. Maybe perhaps getting rid of limits or whatever. Being that the idea being, of course, that politics, like economics, like many other things, it's always a minefield of unintended consequences. And when you're talking about, there's all kinds of things that sound great, right? Like in principle, like transparency, like campaign finance reform. But, you put
like more people voting.
Right, like more people voting, yeah, et cetera. But then those things in practice don't always have the intended consequences. One is the campaign finance reform is a really good example where we say, oh, well, we're going to get money out of politics. Well, you didn't get money out of politics at all. In fact, more money is being spent on politics than ever, and now it's just going into other channels that are harder to regulate and that make push candidates to further extremes because they don't they don't have that mechanism of the party to sort of moderate, be as a moderating force that says, okay, we we care about issues A, B, and C, but we also care about winning these elections, and not just these elections, but elections down the road, so on and so forth. So, whereas a given group like the Koch brothers or something might just say, look, we don't care whether we win or not. We just want to push our agenda however we can. So you're going to be our candidate. If you want our money, then you're gonna go along with what we say. And you don't have that intermediary of the party as a moderating force. So I think that's a big thing that is talked about as a solution here. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be like anything else. It's going to be a piecemeal thing that would require a number of revisions to push us back towards a system that is not corrupt, but is much.
But it's corrupt. Well, it's corrupt. I mean, the whole book is like, yeah, no, it's corrupt, but it's corrupt in the right ways. Corrupt but functional.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, well, yeah. Even he. I mean, here's
like a drunken school crossing guard.
Here's a quote that I think sums that idea up. He says, "As I hope is obvious, I am not arguing that political machines and machine-like behavior are always good. I am arguing that machines and machine-like behavior are necessary, and that governing without them in America is high in friction and low in efficiency, and sometimes will not be possible at all." But anyway, you mentioned real-world examples, right? And you referenced the Utah Mormon community / gay community kind of coming together. on that particular legislation. But another, I thought, good example from the real world that he talks about is how, and this with regards to transparency again, when candidate Obama was talking about negotiating healthcare, he said, "Oh, we're going to put it on national television, and make sure everyone knows what's happening." And when President Obama decided to negotiate healthcare, he went into secret negotiations in a room with the interested parties, because ultimately, as a practical matter, he realized that was the only way anything was going to get done.
Yeah, Obama definitely. I mean, familiarizing yourself with this ethos is. Obama comes across as maybe one of the best practitioners of transactional politics. Certainly to hold the presidency in the last few elections.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think he, particularly if you look at the fact that the other side hasn't really been willing to transact anything,
right?
It's been pretty impressive that the things that he's gotten done. But yeah, it's I think he would be much more willing to have been more transactional than he's been if they had played ball. I mean, for example, the grand bargain was a good example of that with John Boehner, where they went out and played golf or whatever, and they essentially cut a deal that was reasonable enough for both sides, but Boehner couldn't sell it to his constituency, to the rest of the party, couldn't get the votes, and that's part of the problem that we talk about here, is that the parties have been so dismantled and so disempowered that there are almost no carrots and no sticks at this point. So somebody like John Boehner and now Paul Ryan is finding himself in the same boat. There's just not a lot they can do to wrangle votes. I mean, they don't have a lot they can threaten these people with, because it's like, hey, we're going to withhold the party money. Well, we don't need the party money because we have super PAC money, or whatever. Oh, we're going to withhold the party endorsement. Well, that doesn't matter anymore. Well, we might have to run a different kind of campaign. Well, we'll just primary you. I mean, there's all these things that make it very difficult for them to enforce that. And again, like, what can they offer them? Well, we'll offer you this chair of this committee. Well, those don't have the power they used to have, because we don't have the regular order anymore in the Congress. So it's like all these things that used to be very effective tools to kind of keep people in line or get people on the same page or whatever, are no longer options, and it makes it extremely difficult to govern. So
yeah, I can't remember who specifically said the line from the book, but he talked about how a leader with no one behind him is just a guy walking away.
Yeah, just a guy taking a walk, and
that's taking a walk. That's better.
And that was Boehner.
Yeah,
who said that?
Yeah, it definitely seems like the one thing that is probably hard for people to swallow, almost feels emotionally incorrect. Of course, we're talking about a sort of political philosophy which asks you to divorce yourself from emotion, so perhaps it makes perfect sense. But one of the things that seems to be a central conceit of the book is that the purity of your ideals more often than not runs in diametric opposition to functional governance.
Yeah,
and idealism basically sidelines the political process more than helps or gets anything accomplished.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and also speaks to this quote that I just pulled up. Where it says, one academic propounds that an act is corrupt when private interests trump public ones in the exercise of public power, and a person is corrupt when they use public power for their own ends, disregarding others. A definition which seems to erase altogether any boundary between self-interested transactional politics and corruptions. As progressives, ever disgusted with politics, search for new dragons to slay, one struggles to understand what sort of real-world political system is not corrupt. And I think that's kind of the point, right? Is that there just isn't a way, if you're going to hold it to that high of an ideal, of a standard, there's just no way that politics is not going to be corrupt in some form or fashion. So it's like, what is corrupt and how much corruption is acceptable as the oil needed for the machinery to function. But I think that, and one of the things that's a challenge too, right, is that you talk about idealism and ideology and people being driven by that. And I think that that's something I see a lot with today, is that...
Well, it explains both Trump and Sanders.
Right, yeah. But people get so caught up in like, yeah, but I'm right. Like, this is the thing that is obviously best for everyone, or best for America, and whether that's, whatever your pet cause is,
right.
or
more succinctly, this is the thing that's best for me. And they dress it up in the trappings of, oh, this is what's best for family values, or this is what's best for the country as a whole. Right. But really, it's like, this is what I want.
Yeah, but whether they really believe that or not, I mean, the point is, like, there's that attitude that this is the case. So whether they truly think that it's selfless or not, it sort of doesn't matter functionally, because it's like they have that belief, and that's fine. I mean, I it's understandable to have a strong belief, especially, if you've done a lot of research, if you've done a lot of thinking about something, if you feel like inspired by some kind of faith or religion or whatever. I mean, there's going to be really strong feelings, strong beliefs, and that's all fine. But like, understanding that other people feel the same way, like, about their things, and like, why should you just get your way completely? Like, that's great, but that's kind of an immature way of thinking about it, right? Is just like, well, I'm right, and all these things are the best things for the country, so why don't we just do all of these things, and who cares what anyone else thinks? Like, that's not a viable way to work in a democracy, in a divided government republic. That's not viable. You have to understand that other people feel just as strongly about their things, and you're going to have to come to some sort of mutually, agreeable consideration if you're going to have anything at all that's going to be accomplished here. So I don't know. I mean, it's like the shove it down their throats approach only goes so far. You might be able to get a couple little things in at the edges that way, but you're not going to accomplish big things across the board.
Hey man, I stand by my principles, and I'm not paying taxes until they take e pluribus unum off of the dollar bill, man. Until In God We Trust is off of my money, then I'm just gonna not pay taxes.
All right. So hopefully the IRS is not listening to this podcast.
They're always listening.
And I mean, they'll definitely have to come after you for all the back taxes from this year.
Yeah. Been racking up a lot in ad support for this podcast, for one. This is the thing, though. In taking away the book as a whole, a lot of this feels very common sense to me, because it's a lot of it's like, hey, the system's corrupt, but it's always going to be that way. There's never been a governmental system that actually functions that isn't, and maybe we should just, accept that that's the way that things get done. But relaying that to your average voter or the man on the street feels like it doesn't do anything to help whatever sort of apathy they feel or whatever sort of distrust they feel. And so that's where I'm finding it difficult to turn a corner with the book, because for a guy like you, I expect you to read this and be like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. But how do I sort of capture any of these ideas in a meaningful way and talk to my downstairs neighbor about them. There's a guy that won't even vote for the guy that he likes, because he believes the system is so corrupt.
Yeah.
Or just the answers in the book itself, and I just count my blessings that he's not voting. Is that?
Yeah,
that seems to be what the book says.
Yeah, honestly, that's not. I think that's where I would fall in on the spectrum, is to say, let's not encourage him to get involved in the political process, perhaps. But yeah, and again, I'm glad you brought that up, because the next little piece that I wanted to read on the book talks about the primary system, and this is something that is very germane to today's events. Obviously, as we are winding down the primary season now, the modern primary system where voters are directly voting for candidates is a fairly recent phenomenon. For most of American history, it pretty much was just party leaders got together and decided this is the guy we're going to nominate, and that's how it worked. The voters themselves didn't have a say in the process. So that's a pretty recent phenomenon. And he says here, I'll note that the switch to direct voter nomination probably has been the modern political world's most conspicuous example of unintended and perverse consequences. A crucial premise of populist reform, namely that most people want to participate in more politics, turns out to be wrong. And so, instead of opening decision-making to a broader, more diverse, a more representative spectrum than party hacks represented, primaries have skewed decision-making toward the notably narrow, ideologically extreme, and decidedly non-representative sliver of voters who turn out in primary elections. The universe of those who actually cast primary ballots is small and hyper-partisan and rewards candidates who hew to ideological orthodoxy. So I think that's something we've certainly seen this election, perhaps more than any other. And it's also a reminder of something that, not to bang on the Sanders supporters, but, I got to get in one little dig.
Yeah,
there.
of course.
Is, one of the arguments that I've seen floating online is this thing about how, like more, all these Americans are coming out for Bernie Sanders, and it's this huge wave of support. But again, it's like really the number of people who vote in the primaries is pretty small. It's a very small section of the electorate. So it's like, it's millions of people, and that's great, and certainly shows that it's a voice that needs to be heard. But it's not like it's the majority of the country, which is the way the Sanders supporters, I feel like they're portraying it, that
right.
That it's somehow the majority of the country is behind him. And
yeah, Samantha Bee touched upon this on one of her most recent episodes. She put it very bluntly. She said, like, any way that you poll the numbers, like in open primaries and closed primaries, and popular vote and electoral votes, like, he loses every single time. So just like, stop crying foul and get over it. Like, he's lost,
Right. Yeah, I mean,
that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow.
Yeah. But I think furthermore, it's just that idea that, again, okay, well, if he's so close, then, maybe he could do so much better in the general election. But we just don't really know that at all, given, again, how small a sliver and how hyper partisan that sliver is that votes in primaries, making the judgment from primary election results and somehow trying to translate to general election results is not something you can do accurately because of that very reason. Because there just are a ton of people who don't bother to even get involved or start paying attention until the primaries are over. So that's something that's, again, if you're totally wrapped up in it and you're, pushing hard for a particular candidate, it's hard. I think maybe a little hard to see outside of that tunnel vision. And understand that you're not representing a large slice of the American electorate, much less the American population as a whole, who, of course, has a huge portion which doesn't vote at all.
Yeah, it's that sort of idealism you're talking about is one of the sort of the three bugbears in this story. You have basically progressives, and you have populists and you have libertarians. Those are sort of the three arms of the Hydra that our man Roush is going after. And, you know, the idealism that drives each of those the idealism that drives each of those three branches sort of makes them intertwined more so than they would care to admit. And makes democracy in its modern form, you know, or government in its current form in the United States less effective.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's and the idea is that these are all good intentions,
Sure.
you know, behind these things. They're all like things that we can.
Well, you and I would say we're progressives. We would identify with the progressive agenda, I think, in a large part.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not even about it's not even about the positions. I think in this case, what it's really about is the method of how politics gets done, right? Which is it's more of a procedural question. It's more of a functional question than it is the particular positions, and that's something that, you know, this book in particular does really steers away from. Is it basically completely steers away from talking about almost any specific policy positions, and because I think that's the point. Is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat, whether you're Republican, conservative, liberal, progressive, whatever you want to label yourself, and whatever your particular preferred policies are. You're better off in a system where the government can function, like, and where deals can be made and where transactional politics can happen. Like, that's better for everyone, regardless of your position. Like, you're not gonna get a king. You're not gonna get a dictator that just puts your agenda in place 100%. So given that that's not going to happen, you're likely to get more of what you want, no matter what that is, under a system that has more transactionalism in it. So I think that's one of the key takeaways.
Yeah, and stop anyone out there that says they're an anarchist. Just cut it out. Just stop it.
You know, this is you know, one of the other challenges that you have when you talk about you know, trying to legislate away all this quote unquote corruption, is that it becomes it becomes harder and harder to define where that line is, right? Like, where is it actually corrupt and where is it just doing business? And one of the things they talk about here is the idea of groups not being able to coordinate with, you know, super PACs or whatever, these groups that are doing ads essentially on behalf of a candidate, but because they're taking money that's outside the normal channels, the party or whatever, they were forced outside these by other legislation, that now there's these rules that you can't coordinate. And it says, the Supreme Court has yet to determine what coordination means. The kinds of questions which the appeals court said await resolution are hopelessly metaphysical. For example, what if the coordinated speech implies rather than expresses a preference for a particular candidate's election? It's hard to assemble power in government if consulting or cooperating with the people you are assembling is a criminal act, or if you can't tell whether it's a criminal act. And I think that's sort of the mire that we've gotten ourselves in by this crusade to eliminate any sense of impropriety from politics. It's like, look, it's politics. It's gonna have some impropriety.
Yeah.
And the more you try to regulate it away, the more you just push it into underground channels, which are worse. And you know, we've seen this. Like, this should not be something that people don't understand, because we've seen it all the time. Other examples of it, whether you talk about the drug war, whether you talk about obviously prohibition, things like this. Like, when there's things that are so fundamental to the way people operate, you know, like drugs and alcohol, and you say, okay, that's illegal for this, that's impure, and it's not to the highest moral ideals, so we're gonna eliminate it. Then you don't eliminate it, you just push it underground and create a whole another culture, which has a bunch of issues associated with it, which are harder to regulate, harder to deal with. It's like again, legalizing the corruption, legalizing the graft, legalize whatever you want to call it, and putting it out there in the system where we can have some regulation and some sense of where it's happening, and just again be more honest about it is ultimately better. And it seems counterintuitive, but it's like I think that's the it should be understandable for anyone who who's seen those other examples. Like, yeah, it's not trying to legislate morality, which is a lot of this comes down to, right? Is trying to legislate morality is almost never a good thing. And if it's never a good thing, whether you talk about people's sexual preference, whether you talk about people's what they choose to do with their bodies, and what they choose to put into those bodies, whatever. If it's not a good idea for those things, why would it be a good thing for politics too, right? So I don't know. I think that there really is. It's hard for people to get away from the sense that politics should somehow be so high-minded and so removed from the everyday world of mortals. And it's like, why would it be? It's just people,
Yeah,
like,
people are horrible.
Yeah, it's just politicians are just people, and maybe not even the best people. Like,
right, almost certainly not the best people.
Right, yeah. So if they're getting into politics, they're probably
you know what, we're stuck with them.
So yeah, so if they want to do that job, then they're not they're not necessarily going to be high-minded. They probably wouldn't have taken the job if they were. So yeah, so you can't force that onto them. And if you do, then you have all these other consequences.
So Kyle, give me 3 main thrusts from this book for anyone out there that hasn't read it, or wants to read it, but I don't want them to read it. So just you basically summarize the body of this book in 3 main thrusts for people.
Well, I don't know. I would say that I think that we have probably done it pretty well at this point, if giving people a good idea of it. But yeah, I mean, I think one is just that transactional politics is a necessary evil, if you want to call it that, for government to function effectively. Certainly for the U.S. government to function effectively, probably any real world system. And to that, the attempts to reform it, attempts to moralize about government, attempts to somehow filter it through extreme idealism are always doomed to fail, and most likely are going to have worse consequences than what you started with. And then finally, that you have to have the space to operate. You have to have the cover of party machinery, the availability of the proverbial smoky back room in order to make things work. Because the fact of the matter is, if we want to negotiate something, if I'm a Democrat and you're a Republican and we go into a room together, I need to be able to say things to you that it might, everything needs to be on the table. I need to be saying things that are kind of crazy. Like I might say to you, all right, like what if we cut Social Security, right? And I have no intention of cutting Social Security in the end, but you have to get the ball rolling somehow. I have to give you something just to get, what could I get for that? And then, maybe you say something crazy like that you could never really give up because your constituents would go crazy. But again, it gets that conversation starting, and then we whittle it down. But you can't do that if it's out in the open, right? If I'm a Democrat and I say, well, what if we make some kind of reduction of Social Security? Everybody goes nuts and says like, oh, this guy's a traitor. We can never cut Social Security. And so it's killed before it can even get started.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to be able to have that give and take, that push and pull all happen in private. So then when the deal is completed, you can present it in toto. So it's okay, here, here's the final package. And then people can say, oh, okay, I can see where you're not totally happy about this, but I'm glad we got this or whatever. And ultimately it's an even-handed enough deal that but that's, again, you can't ever get to that stage. You can never get to that final agreement that works for everybody without having that space to maneuver. So I think that's probably the third big thrust.
Yeah, when you see how the sausage is made, you end up not getting any sausage.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, if there's transparency every step of the way, it's like somebody, you don't have somebody, you're not awake for your own surgery. And they're like every step the doctor's doing, you're like, okay, now explain fully what you're doing to me right now. You know what I mean? You just shut up, get it done, and hopefully you walk out with augmented breasts or a less warty dick or whatever you went in for.
Call back. Yeah. And again, I think that there is a segment of the population that feels like any kind of compromise, any kind of deal, any kind of giveaways to the other party or something like that is a betrayal, and is immoral and is unacceptable. And that's something that, again, I think has to be, those people have to sort of be shunted aside, right? Like they have to be marginalized in the political process if it's going to work. And right now, I feel like those people have a way too big a stake in the political process, and that's one of the problems.
And so you have all these people that are railing against special interests that are they themselves special interests,
right? Yeah, but it's like, well, my special interest is okay.
Yeah.
But these other special, it's that same sort of blinders that we talked about earlier, right? Where it's like, well, my cause or my things are right, so they're cool to just push on everyone else. But these other things that these people are pushing for, that's garbage. And again, it's fine to feel that way, but just have some recognition that other people feel that way too. And at some point, you're gonna have to sit down and hammer out a damn deal. So that's about, I think that's about the size of it. And if you didn't read it before the podcast, maybe you'll be inspired to do so now.
Yeah, and if you have a differing set of opinions, then make sure you tweet Kyle or leave a comment on our YouTube page, or just talk to him about it.
Take it up with me. No. Anyway, but yeah, it's a different view. It's a little bit outside the box. It definitely goes, I think, counterintuitive to a lot of what is at this point just sort of conventional wisdom about politics and what we need and what the solutions are, which tend to be more transparency and less corruption and less pork and all these different ideas, less money in to the parties, et cetera, et cetera. These are all things I think are fairly considered to be fairly conventional wisdom for both sides of the aisle. And this book is really arguing that maybe all of those things are wrong. So, and we'd be better off the other way. And in fact, that we probably were better off when things were less like that in the not so distant past. So again, check it out. The book obviously can do a much better job of it than we did in this discussion, but it maybe at least whetted your appetite and makes you think along a little bit different lines. So it certainly did for me.
Yeah, and I read it in a car.
Yeah.
So it's not, it's not an epic undertaking by any means.
All right. So
in the interest of keeping things felt, I have for our segment about music, our weekly seg, I have decided to just recommend a couple of quick songs instead of talking about a full album or full band. And I wanted to give you something. Kyle, did you happen to listen to Vince Staples by chance?
I did.
Okay. And so any quick thoughts on that as we move forward?
Nothing too in depth. I mean, obviously it was
rap music.
Yeah, it was rap music. Had some hip hopness to it. It was. I mean, it was a good listen. It was definitely, again, it was kind of an easy thing to throw on when I was taking my son to the park and just had my ghetto blaster on my shoulder and
just listening to all the lyrics.
Yeah.
Like, my boy doesn't have to grow up this way,
and blaring it for all the neighbors. Your
Ray-Bans on and everything. I like it. Well, I wanted to give you something that was born a little less. Obviously, so many artistic endeavors are born from like a cynical place, and you can get some really great art that way. But I wanted to explore the other side with two quick songs that you can check out on YouTube from two bands, which I don't think actually have albums out. And these songs and bands are a song called Trying to Find Myself. That's Tryna, Trying to Find Myself, by a group called Busty and the Bass. And that's on YouTube. You can check that out. And the second song is a song called Funky Duck, and it's by Wolfpeck, which is Vulfpeck. And what these songs kind of have in common is that these bands are very clearly like high school jazz band kids that grew up without any sort of adversity and just a love of music and a love of like funky bass lines and like horn arrangements. And they clearly have walked through life on a primrose path. And so they're just enjoying making music together. So both of those songs, Funky Duck and Trying to Find Myself, should put a smile on your face. It's just, enjoying music for the sake of pure enjoyment. And I highly recommend both of them. Kyle, what you reading this week, Holmes?
Well, this is not specifically what I'm reading, but what I'll recommend
Kyle,
this
what
week.
you reading this week, Holmes?
Is that how they speak on the Summer Isles?
Yeah.
Well, my recommendation this week on Calla Remains to You, the books are still a thing, is, we've been talking a lot of Game of Thrones, and, people who watch Game of Thrones perhaps have read the books, perhaps enjoy an epic series. And if you are that kind of person, then this is a great recommendation for you. This is The First Man in Rome.
It's a very svelte book. I know you can't see it as an audience member, but man,
it does not fit into the svelte theme for this podcast. Although this podcast doesn't fit into that theme either, since I see we're heading north of 2 hours at this point. But look, we tried. Damn it, we cut out a whole segment. We just can't shut up.
We spent that segment's length just explaining how much shorter this podcast was going to be up front.
That may have been a mistake. Anyway, the book is called The First Man in Rome. It's by Colleen McCullough. And this book is the first in a series, 6-book series, I believe, maybe 7, which basically covers the entire arc of the life of Julius Caesar. And it is very Game of Thrones like in a lot of ways. If you like the parts of Game of Thrones that are about all the political intrigue, if you like all the complex family dynamics, the huge sprawling cast of characters, sort of the epic timeline, huge armies, military strategy, sex, which Game of Thrones doesn't shy away from. Anyway, if you like
I'm listening.
Should I say sex again?
No.
If you
I don't like too much. I'm an average white dude. Too much frightens me. Not enough frightens me.
If you like all those parts of Game of Thrones and, the magic and dragons are kind of just incidental for you, then this is a fantastic book. Obviously, it is rooted in history. As you might guess, it's historical fiction, but it has all those other pieces that I mentioned. And yeah, they're all long, epic books. They're in the series. Like I said, this first one looks like it's about 1,000 pages, and it's the epicness of it is such that even though I just told you that it's about the arc of Julius Caesar's life, that's really the through line for these books. This first book, he's not even born when the book starts, and by the time it ends, he's just a baby and basically a footnote in the story. He's not, there's no focus on him at all. It's just like something that kind of happens off to the side that this baby is born, who happens to be named Gaius Julius Caesar. So the two main characters that are the focus of this first book are Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who are two of the giants of Rome who kind of lay the groundwork for Caesar's eventual rise to power. And anyway, yeah, it's really a fascinating book. I love the whole series. If you like history, if you like particularly Roman history, obviously.
If you like pina coladas. Oh, I'm sorry.
If you like Dancing in the Rain, I wouldn't recommend doing that with this book because, wet book, not the best situation. But you could read it.
Kyle's always disparaging wet books.
I'll let that one go, but yeah. Anyway, you might not be able to read this one in a car on the way to record a podcast. It'd probably take a little longer than that. But yeah. But if you, like I said, if you're looking for an epic read, something to dive into, something where you just get wrapped up in huge cast of characters and get deep into that political intrigue and military strategy and all that fun stuff. This is for you. Again, not for the faint of heart, but for those who really like to get immersed in a world. Definitely recommend Colleen McCullough's The First Man in Rome. So, and I would recommend that we end this podcast before we get past 2 hours, but we've already failed to do that. So do you want to just talk about a movie or something?
Yeah, why not? We should, what we should do is find a director that we like and then just follow all of their work in reverse chronological order.
Yeah. Like we should do that right now and just follow it on the podcast. Just keep recording as we're doing that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Maybe the batteries will just run out and kind of put us out of our misery at this point. Would it be weird if they ran out right now, right in mid-sentence?